Hello, and welcome to this video where we're going to explore the serious game Map My Way of Working. Now this is one of the most useful games in the toolkit, and it's one of the ones that actually really helps people learn practices. It works with any practice or combination of practices. It works with off-the-shelf things like Scrum and Kanban, and it works with things that you've created in-house. This is the game that Jeff Sutherland says is the key to learning Scrum, and teams that did this game with Scrum learned more about Scrum in 1 hour than they did in the whole of the 2-day course. So let's dive into the game and see how it works. So the first thing we're going to do is set our scope. When we talk about mapping our way of working, what do we mean? Is it everything, including our HR processes, our management processes? Is it just one particular practice like use cases or Scrum, or is it some combination? So we've got to set our scope and understand what it is we want to be mapping. Now we have some instructions, as with all these games. We've got the instructions at the top with why we play the game, with how it works, what the specific instructions are, and some hints and tips for how you can play the game in different ways. So the first thing we do is, as we say here, we set our scope, and then we check if we've got the right practices. Now I've got a team room here with some practices in it. We've got Scrum, we've got user stories, and we have Scrum Foundation, which is the pillars and the values of Scrum. So if that's enough, then I can leave it at that. But if I think, well, actually, I know that I'm using, say, for example, BDD as well, and maybe I know I'm also using story mapping. So let's bring in these two practices as well. And then the fun starts. Then we get into the next stage, which is mapping our way of working. Now, one of the best ways to start is like this, with a blank page, because what we're trying to do is to capture how we actually work. We don't want to start with the ideal view of Scrum, the Scrum overview picture. We don't really want to start with somebody else's idea of how things should work. We want to start with how we actually work as a team, because one of the things that emerges from this game very often is teams think they understand a practice well, but when they look at it, they realize that they don't. Now, one of the variations of this game actually exposes that specifically. And the way you play that variant is you take your practice, let's say we're going to use Scrum, and I'm going to just turn the token view on for these because it shows up nicely on the board. So here's Scrum, and this is what Scrum contains. It's got backlog refinement, it's got sprint planning, the daily Scrum, retrospective, etc. Now I can put on the rest of those elements. So one version of this game is we take all the bits of Scrum and we put them on the side of the board. Let's just line them up nicely. And then the game is about dragging these onto my board and then connecting them together. What that tells me is a few things. As I start to connect them together, I'll start to learn things. So I might click on product backlog refinement and say, well, obviously this has got to do with the product backlog. So let's go and get our product backlog. And then it's got the product goal. So let's bring the product goal in. So we've got a backlog refinement. It results in a backlog. The backlog has goals in it, and it also has backlog items in it. So we've got a little bit of a picture starting here where we've got the product backlog, and it contains, let's make that a little brighter, product goal and product backlog. Now, if I'm playing this part of the game where I'm actually going to drag these things in, then rather than drag them from the panel, what you end up doing is you deplete this pool of Scrum elements on the left hand side as you build your Scrum picture in the main part of the game board. Two things happen. First, as you're building the picture, you realize, oh yeah, the product goal should be in the backlog. That's interesting. I maybe didn't think that. Or you realize I don't really understand, or haven't properly understood that description. So you learn a little bit about the things that you are doing, and you see ways that you can do them better. The second thing that happens is you realize things that you're not doing. So maybe you find that when, let's imagine we've put all the Scrum elements here on the left hand side, and we've pulled a picture across and we've not used them all. We've maybe left some on the side. Typically, some of the things that people leave on the side are these things. We don't really fold in adaptation, inspection, and transparency into how we do Scrum, or these Scrum values. We don't really remember that they were even there, so they end up getting left on the side. So we want to build a picture of our way of working. So in this case, a good place to start is to say, well, we'll pull in these practices, and then we'll start to build our way of working. Normally with some sort of a flow. What do we start with? What happens next? In these activities we do, what's the purpose of them? What the result? What activities lead to which work products? Which people are involved? And then you add on responsibilities and things like that. And we end up with something that looks a little bit like this. So in this example, this is one where a team did in fact say, actually, these values and pillars, when they dragged them on, they said, well, I don't really know how we use these. So they sat them up here in the corner. But they've added a bunch of extra information. They've put on the people in the team. They've put on where they're actually conducting these these things, the cadences, and how it works for them. Now, this is an interesting one. If you're familiar with Scrum, you'll recognize that it is not the job of the Scrum Master to set tasks and set direction for the product owner. In this case, that's how they work. That's the way that they behave. And one of the things that they recognize is that probably isn't the best way. It's not very self-managing, and it certainly doesn't demonstrate the kind of autonomy that you probably want. So don't sugarcoat this. Use this to capture how you actually work. And then what you've got is a good picture of how you work today. And if you're going to be doing evolutionary change, that's the most important start point, is where are we today? And how do we make small evolutionary improvements as we go forward? Maybe as a result of retrospectives. So actually conducting this exercise in a retrospective, it's a really good place to do it, because you can focus not just on what you've achieved this iteration or this sprint, but also how you went about doing it. What were the things that you did, and did you do them well? And it allows you to pick on things like, say, sprint planning, read what it's about, read what you should have before you start, read what it should result in, read what associations people have with it, and then ask yourself the question, does this definition of sprint planning look like how my team does sprint planning? And if the answer is yes, it looks a lot like how my team does sprint planning, then that's great. If on the other hand you're saying, well, do you know what, that's not really how we work, well, that's when we want to start creating actions. And we can do that by either directly creating to-dos using the to-do feature, or we can take a sticky note, write down what we want to be considering, which is stop telling the PO what to do, and then we can prioritize that, and we can decide which actions we take forward. So this is a really good game for a couple of reasons. Obviously, what it gives you is a description of your way of working. So if you're in the Kanban mode of making your work policies explicit, as this team are, we're very clear on what we do, how we do it, when we do it. This also starts to talk about why we do it. So it starts to see, well, we have an activity and it can result in these things. And also where you've got gaps. So whether you've got activities that don't seem to have much purpose, or things that get created but you don't know why they're getting created, you'll start to see disconnects. So that's how we play the Map My Way of Working. There's 1,000 different ways to do it, and they're all really about capturing and understanding how you work. The real benefit with using Essence practices is when you have the practices on the right hand side, and you've got the descriptions of them, it's all at your fingertips. It keeps you honest. So you've not got any excuse for forgetting what it means to have a user story, or for forgetting what this activity is all about. So that means you can do that little test of, are we actually doing that the way we think we're doing it? Good game to keep collaborative, to keep lots of conversations going, lots of variations on it, and you can see some of the the variations. Just going to pin that to stop that happening again. See some of the variations up here, splitting into more than one group and running it independently and seeing how similar your pictures are. And there's lots of other ideas there. Plus, there'll be lots of other ways that you can bring your own innovation and creativity into this game, and we'd love to hear how you get on. So that's the Map My Way of Working game.